Yeah. So we're going to get into Catholicism here. This is going to be interesting. That's all right. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do this. This is a good question. This is a good question by Short Farrell. But yet, and I thought about this before. I thought about this for a while. But yet, Our Lady warns against communists by name, not fascists. So you are referring to the the Fatimist apparitions, the Fatima apparitions. Am I correct? You are referring to it, but there's more. So if you look at, so let's talk about Marian apparitions. This is how autistic this show is. And again, I was told that when I was a child that I am autistic, so I guess that's why the show is this way. Very autistic show. We're talking about PCs, German this, Trump this, that. Now we're talking about Marian apparitions. Let's talk about Marian apparitions. Why not? Let's just do it. Fatima is an Arab name. It is. It is, absolutely. Spain was under the control of Moors for hundreds of years, so you're going to have a lot of Semitic influence in Spain. So you have the apparitions of Fatima, these little girls in Portugal. They get this vision. There's a little boy amongst them as well. These siblings. They get this vision of the Virgin Mary, and the Virgin Mary says that they need to pray the Rosary every day, and eventually Russia needs to be dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, or else the errors of Russia will flood the world. This is essentially what the Fatima apparition says. Now, here is the thing. Communism or Marxism didn't come from Russia. This is the dilemma that I have, or this is the issue that I have when it comes to the Marian apparition of Fatima. And again, I believe in Marian apparitions. I think there were Marian apparitions that happened. I do. I truly believe that. But when it comes to the Fatima apparition, or the number of other more recent Catholic Marian apparitions, for example, some of the ones that have come out of Poland, what boggles my mind is that the Marian apparitions, these particular ones, will fixate on communism, but not fascism. So, for example, there is a Polish Marian apparition, the name of which I don't remember because it's been years since I read about it. But there was a Marian apparition that happened in Poland, I want to say sometime around the early 1940s. And in this apparition, the Virgin Mary says, I'm not saying that she actually said this, but in this apparition, supposedly the Virgin Mary says that communism is the great threat. And this happened in Poland, very similar to the Fatima apparition. And I'm thinking, hold on a second, because the Poles were butchered like cattle, like chickens in a slaughterhouse, by Ukrainian fascists, by Ukrainian Nazis, nationalists. But yet, when you look at these various Marian apparitions that were going on in Poland, they don't warn about fascism. They warn about communism. But why isn't... Hold on. So Mary is talking to her spiritual children in Poland, and her spiritual children in Poland are being butchered like cattle animals in a slaughterhouse by Ukrainian Nazi collaborators. And Mary doesn't mention this, but she mentions communism. So you rewind back to the Fatima Marian apparitions, and she's saying the errors of Russia will flood the world. Well, hold on a second. Communism or Marxism didn't come from Russia. It came from Germany. From freaking Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German Jew. And Vladimir... Oh, God. Oh, Jesus. Have mercy. I can't. We gotta get into the history. How did Marxism... Okay, who funded Marxism to take over Russia? The German government. Look into this. Look into Vladimir Lenin's train. The German government was in the middle of a war with the Russians. The Germans and the Russians were killing each other. Horrendous violence, battles, high casualty rates. They were killing each other in East Prussia. It was brutal. Brutal war. Russia was a big problem for the Germans. Big problem for the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. What are we going to do? So the Germans, being the innovative people that they are, they got together and they said, okay, we're fighting the French, the British, and the Russians. Okay, well, if we can just remove the Russians, that removes a big obstacle for us. And at that point, all we got to deal with is the Brits and the French. And that's a lot easier than having to deal with the Russians at the same time. A lot easier. So they said, how do we get rid of the Russians? There is a man who lives in Switzerland. His name is Vladimir Lenin. And Vladimir Lenin is a Marxist. He was kicked out of Russia by the Tsar. He lives next to some sausage factory in Switzerland. This was the truth, right? He lived literally next to a sausage factory in Switzerland. The Germans then have a meeting with Lenin in Potsdam. And they tell Lenin, we're going to give you a ton of gold. We're going to put you on a train. You're going to go to Russia. We're going to fund your whole Bolshevik revolution. Done. Your job, Mr. Lenin, is when you take over Russia, or if you take over Russia, you are going to remove Russia from the war. Deal. Lenin goes to Russia. Yes, I understand there were people on Wall Street who were backing the Bolshevik Revolution. The Americans, in fact, were optimistic about the Bolsheviks overthrowing the Russian government because they said, oh, well, this is the end of Russian authoritarianism and all that American bullshit. I totally get it. You're absolutely right? There's a whole bunch of, anytime you get into historical events like this, there's always going to be all these layers of information. But I'm giving you what I know. I'm giving you facts about this historical event. And so Lenin goes on a train from Germany, goes all the way to Russia, does his Bolshevik revolution. The Bolsheviks start recruiting people in the Russian military. You have Russian soldiers murdering their commanding officers. So the Bolsheviks cause a mutiny in the Russian military. There's chaos. Russia is weakened, and the Bolsheviks eventually take over the parliament. At this point, Russia was not under a czar. Russia was under some other government. It was being ran by some Freemason figure of some sort. And the Bolsheviks overthrew the people that overthrew the czar. And so now Russia was under the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks said, okay, we're removing ourselves from the war. Not too long after this, there's the Brest-Litovsk conference. Very, very important conference, very evil conference. The Bolsheviks got together with the Bulgarians, the Germans, and the Ottomans. And the Russians basically said, the communists, the Bolsheviks, basically tell the Germans, the Bulgarians, and the Turks, take what you want. And the Ottomans say, okay, we want the part of Armenia that was under the Russian Empire. Deal, you got it. And that part of Armenia was given to the Turks, and the Turks invaded that part of Armenia and began the Armenian genocide in that land. The Germans said, okay, we want Ukraine. Give us Ukraine. And the Germans begin their control, or they begin to hover over Ukraine. Regardless of all this information, the errors, the error of Russia doesn't begin with Russia. It begins with the West. The Germans, like you said, the Brits, people on Wall Street. It begins with the West funding the Bolshevik Revolution. And the Bolshevik Revolution was the Bolshevik Revolution was following what ideology? The ideology of Karl Marx. And so Marx was where? Well, he was from where? He wasn't from Russia. He was from Germany. German Jewish guy. And the errors of Marx take over Russia. Well, why doesn't this apparition talk about the error of Germany or the error of the West? Marxism is the error of the West. It's not the error of Russia. So what is this apparition talking about? When I began to read about this history, I began to wonder, okay, hold on, this apparition doesn't make any sense. errors of Russia, but it came from Germany. The Germans backed it. People on Wall Street backed it. The British backed it. What's happening here? Do you see my issue here? And this is my issue with these apparitions. This is why the trad Catholic movement is so crazy. They're all focusing on communism. Communism, 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 Marxism, cultural Marxism. And the freaking Cold War system that we've been living under has a heyday with this because they say, oh, look, all these Catholics are paranoid about communism. Let's capitalize on that. And that is why I believe when you look at these figures like Fulton Sheen and this whole trad Catholic movement against communism, I suspect the CIA is behind. I suspect it's some sort of a psyop to get people to hate the Russians. That's what I think it is. And you have this whole mentality that's anti-Russia, and you go into any trad Catholic circle, any trad Catholic church, what are they going to be talking about? The errors of Russia, the errors of Russia, Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad. Why? Because they believe in these apparitions, and I think that the CIA crept in and said, oh, we can definitely use this. That's what I suspect happened. Engels was German. Yes. Yes. Do you think the Fatima apparition was a hoax? I don't think it was a hoax. I think it was demonic. That's what I think. I think that it was demonic. There's a video that you can see of these little girls walking backwards. It looks like something out of The Ring. It's freaking creepy. There was this big event that happened in Portugal where a bunch of people saw this ginormous, bright manifestation in the sky, and you can see pictures of people. They took photographs of people as they were looking at this entity, and they look completely dazed. And I'm thinking, I think this is demonic. I think it's all a satanic influence to get people to hate Russia and to get people to ignore the fascists, to get people to ignore the nationalists. I think that's what the devil wants. The devil is a chess player. This is the whole thing. We're in a giant, I did a couple of videos on this. We are all in a giant chess match, and we're all in a cosmic war between the devil and God. And the devil has his pieces and God has his pieces. And the devil comes along and he sees, okay, Russia is fighting the Germans and this, and they're fighting the Turks. And the devil says, well, I really hate humanity. I love seeing people kill each other, and I hate Armenians, those Christian people over there. I'm going to use the Turks to butcher those people. The Russians are an ally of the Armenians. Well, I don't want those people involved in World War I. What am I going to do? The devil comes along and he says, okay, well, here's my chess piece. So the devil uses the Germans to support the Bolsheviks. That's the devil's chess piece right there. And what did that chess piece do? It removed the Russians from the conflict. And then it led to the carving out of the Russian Empire. And the Armenian part of the Russian Empire was given over to the Turks. Now a Christian land is in my grip, in the murderous grip of my followers, the Ottomans. And more people are murdered. You have more genocide. And that's what happens. And then when you come along, or when someone comes along and says, hey, what about fascism? And believe me, I have had these conversations with Catholics. I have had them. In fact, I recorded one of these conversations. You can see it's one of my older videos for this channel. It happened back in 2020, 2021, one of those years. But I debated this trad Catholic over this issue of nationalism and fascism, and why it's wrong and why it's antithetical to Christianity. And you can read up on this stuff, and you talk to these trad Catholics and you say, hold on a second. What about Ukrainian nationalism? What about the Volyn massacres? What about the fact that the Ukrainians butchered countless Polish people and still deny it today? What about the fact that the Turks, who were nationalists, Islamo-nationalists, what about the Turks when they butchered 1 million Armenian Christians in the name of Turkish nationalism and Islamo-nationalism? What about what the Germans did? What about what the Japanese did? The Japanese were ultra-nationalists, and they killed millions of people in Asia. I mean, what about all of these facts, right? What about the destruction that right-wing nationalism caused? Well, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about communism. Why do you want to talk about communism so much? Because of Fatima. And that's what that was about. That's the whole satanic purpose behind Fatima. That's what I believe. I believe, and I don't think I've ever said this in a video. I don't think I've ever said this before. But I believe that the whole Fatima apparition was a satanic conspiracy to get people to not focus on fascism and to focus on Russia and to hate on Russia. And if you look at, I forgot the name of it, but if you look at, I'll try to find it here. But there was a Polish Marian apparition that happened during World War II. And this Marian apparition in Poland said, hey, communism. What? Yeah, communism. And it's just all about communism. What about fascism? And I did research on, I got to find when this apparition happened since I'm talking about it. But I did research on when this apparition happened, and it happened around the time when Polish people were literally being butchered like cattle animals by Ukrainian fascists. Why isn't Our Lady warning her children about fascism? This is my issue here. It's a demonic deception. It's a satanic deception. So that's my thoughts on that. If you disagree with me, that's fine. We can disagree, but that is my position. I think the whole thing is satanic. Because I listen, I spent years of my life in the trad Catholic movement. Years. And when I began to read on the history of World War II and Nazism and Ukrainian fascism and all this stuff, when I began to read about all this stuff, and I started talking to my fellow Catholics about this stuff, one thing that always disturbed me is how indifferent they were to this reality. Very indifferent. That's one thing I always noticed about trad Catholics is and I'm talking about Catholics that I spoke to in real life and Catholics that I spoke to online. That's one thing I always noticed. I debated Martin Zellner back in 2017. He is an Austrian trad Catholic. He comes from Austria, the land of Nazism, the land that gave birth to Nazism. And I debated him on this issue. And he told me with his freaking Arnold Schwarzenegger accent, he says, there's nothing wrong. We can have the work with the pagans. I have friends who are the neo-pagans, and I'm trying to bring them into the Catholic Church, yeah? And we must have some ties with the neo-pagans to help them come back to the faith, and yada, yada, yada. And he's talking about wearing Thor's hammer necklaces and having this synthesis with neo-paganism. And I asked him a very simple question. I said, what's more important to you, the faith or race? He refused to answer the question. I wonder why. Because for him, faith is religion. His religion is for him, his religion is his race. That's his God. His race is his God. His God is his race. And he's supposedly a trad Catholic, goes to church every Sunday. And that's one thing I noticed talking to trad Catholics, is that they have this indifference towards Nazism, or some of them will straight up support it and embrace it. And I always wonder, where does this mentality come from? And a lot of it has its origins in this obsession with the errors of Russia. And I think that is the whole purpose of the Fatima apparitions. And I think that is really the purpose of the whole thing. And that's why I say it's a satanic conspiracy, because look at the outcome, right? What's the outcome? The outcome is a bunch of Catholics either being indifferent towards fascism or embracing fascism. Because if the errors of, think of it this way, if the errors of Russia are, right, if communism, what they call the errors of Russia, is supposed to be our big focus, then wait a second. I read about World War II. What's going on in World War II? The Germans are fighting the Bolsheviks. The Germans are fighting the errors of Russia. Maybe Hitler was a good guy. That is the conclusion that a lot of trad Catholics go to. They go down that road and they become Nazis. So this is why I say it's a satanic conspiracy. I think it's satanic. I don't even think that these girls got together and made it up as a joke. I think that there was an explicit satanic influence involved in all this. That's what I believe.